Moving forward, we're going to set up our Redux store. And as we mentioned before, the store is the central object that stores your application state, right? So in our example we've been working through from the official Redux documentation, we have created reducers for setting the visibility filter of our to-do items, as well as adding and toggling our to-do items. So the store can do a couple of things here. It can hold our application state. It can allow access to state via the getState function. It can allow state to be updated via dispatch, and it can register listeners via the subscribe function, and also handles unregistering of listeners by the function returned by the initial subscription. So in Redux, we have that single store. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and set it up. It's setting up the store isn't too crazy here. We just have to import the create store function from Redux. We're gonna go ahead and import the to-do app reducer from the reducers.js, and we'll go ahead and create an object called store using the create store function with the to-do application reducer as the primary parameter. Yeah, that all looks about right. Why don't we go ahead and start our web server here just to see that we haven't broken anything. Always a distinct possibility. Loading. Attempted import error. Set visibility filter is not exported from actions. Oh, duh. Index.js. Import in body of module. Line 12 here. Right, and that's what we just fixed. So in a React file, all the import statements should generally be at the top. Okay, so that seems to be working. And here we have some example code here that we can run. Why don't we go ahead and just try running it and just do a quick little sanity check to make sure that things are working as they should be. And then let's just go ahead and copy that. Let's open up our console here. Right, and so here, as we can see, our store does seem to be working. We are in fact adding our reducers, and we are updating the visibility filter in real time. Okay, very cool. So that all seems to be working. So that's good. So let's move on to the next part. This is, I guess, a little article talking about data flow, talking about Redux architecture in a strict unidirectional data flow. So I mean, let's walk through this just to do it. So there's 4 steps. We call store.dispatch, dispatch in action, a plain object with a type and a payload. And we call store.dispatch from anywhere in the app. And the Redux store calls the reducer function you gave it based on the type, right? And then the root reducer may combine the output of multiple reducers in a state tree. And when we emit the action, it's going to call both reducers, and it's going to only activate the reducer that has the type of action that makes sense. And the Redux store finally saves the complete state tree returned by the root reducer. So this new tree is now the next step of your app. So let's go ahead and connect it into React here. Let's see things here. We have a link. Okay, right. So we have some presentational components here. We have some more presentational components here. We have a link. We have a footer. We have a container component. Okay, so we want to hook these presentational components to Redux. So how do we want to hook up any components that we create into Redux? Well, I guess here what we can do is we'll just go ahead and we'll create a new container called sandbox.js, right? And here we'll go ahead and import React components from React, export, well, we'll do class sandbox extends component constructor props here we'll have component did mount in case we want to do any store subscriptions or whatever. And then we'll have our render function, and we will return some beautiful JSX here. And then let's go into our routes components. Let's go ahead and import wow. Right, I guess we're gonna have to export it first. Export default sandbox. Okay. So we're going to export it from the containers folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a new page in our application called Sandbox, which is where we're going to have some random stuff that we are going to be working on, prototyping. Righto. Okay, let's see if that worked. Oh, we got some beautiful JSX right here. Okay. Awesome. So back here, so we want to use the Redux library's connect function here. So to use connect, you need to define a special function called map state to props that describes how to transform the current Redux store state into the props you want to pass to a presentational component you are wrapping. For example, visible to-do list needs to calculate to-dos to pass the to-do list, so we define a function that filters the state.todos according to the state visibility filter and uses it. Okay. But I guess we can continue with the to-do analogy here just to wrap things up here. So, okay, let's go ahead and make some components that we can then import into our sandbox here. So we want to go ahead and make a ToDo.js component here. We're also using something here called prop types. Basically, it's a way of checking that a property is a specific JavaScript type. Completed is a Boolean. This is a string. This is a function. We're gonna need to actually install that. So yarn add prop types, or actually I guess it's just prop types. And for the sake of time here, let's go ahead and do some copying here. So we have our to-do. We have our to-do list. Right. We have a link.js, which It's okay, we'll just, I guess, duplicate. I'm gonna come back and delete these later, but let's just go ahead and throw these in. Components, oh, no, I don't want that. Footer.js, okay. Great, so those are the actual presentational components there. However, we now need to connect the presentational components to the state object by passing in the state object from the central store as props. And so we're going to need to use a special function called mapping state to props that describes how to take the Redux store state that we have into the props that we need. So so here what it's doing is it's creating a function get visible to-dos. It's accepting the to-dos and the filter in as a parameter, and it's saying, okay, you know, show me all completed to-dos. And then it's going to return all the to-dos that have a completed marked as true. And the show active is going to return all the to-dos that are not completed, right? And then this map state to props is going to return these to-dos with the state and this specific visibility filter that's being passed in here. So let's go ahead and add a container called filterlink.js. Go ahead and add that. Go ahead and add visible to-do list here. And we also as well need a we need a, what do you call it? We need a component to add our to-dos, right? So we're gonna just enter all of this into our fancy sandbox. And here in our app.js, we need to tie all this together, right? So the app here in this instance is this div add to-do visible to-do list. But what we can actually do is in our sandbox, we can just import the footer from footer. We can import add to do from add to do and import the visible to do lists from, and then I think this is inside of the components folder if I am not mistaken. Yes, it does look like that's how it is. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and add to do. We'll go ahead and add the visible to do list, and we'll go ahead and add the footer. Is that gonna break something? Oh, well, actually we need to restart our little dev server here. Let's see, survey says got things to take care of soon. Yeah, no, for sure, that definitely broke, which makes sense because we could not find the store in the context of the Connect application. So we have to either wrap the root component in a provider or pass a custom React context provider to provider and the corresponding React context consumer to connect. Fair enough. Well, in fact, that's exactly what we're doing in this very next thing here. So, so in our index.js, right? That's the that's where we have our, you know, our root render, right? We have our app, we have our router. I want to say that we're gonna have some issues here working with the provider and React router. There are going to be some issues here for sure. It's not gonna like this. Oh, provider not defined. Duh. Oh, well, maybe it did like it. So, oh, well, there we go. I guess it's totally fine as long as it's wrapped inside the router. Okay. All right, then. So let's go to /sandbox here. So another to do. We want to show all. Okay, great. So, right, we can mark and we can unmark them like that. Pretty simple. So let's dive in and take a look at what's going on here, right? Like in the sandbox. So we have our AdToDo, we have our visible to-do list, and we have our footer. So let's first take a look at the top. Let's look at the AdToDo container. So it's a presentational component. We're importing connect from React Redux, and what we're doing is we are connecting this component to the Redux store. So this connect function is accepting this, it's accepting this component as a parameter, and it's linking it to the store. Pretty cool. So what's going on here is we have a form, right? And what we're doing is we're using the dispatch function that we're receiving as props and we're using the AdToDo action to take the input value as the text for the AdToDo. So let's put them side by side here so it might make a little bit more sense. So I have a form here, and on submit, like when I'm ready to submit the form, it takes the input value of the form and it's going to dispatch the AdToDo action with the input value as the action.text. And so then it's going to return the updated state as it was. It's going to return these four existing to-dos, and it's going to then add this extra object to the mix, right? So if we take away the connect, nothing is going to work. Well, yeah, nothing's going to work because we can't dispatch any of our actions if we don't actually connect this component to our central store. The nice thing here is that we're receiving the dispatch here. So we're receiving this function due to the connect, due to the provider component here. I believe this is where that dispatch function is coming from. It's just being included as a prop throughout the app. So we've seen app.js, right? So we took a quick look at that. Now let's take a look at the visible to-do list, right? Okay. So we have a function here called get visible to-dos, which takes into to-dos and the filter in. But before we really, before we can really even take a look through that, what we need to think about is how are we taking the state of the central store and how are we passing it down as props to a particular component. And what it comes down to is that here, this container of business logic is being connected to this presentational component, right? So these functions are, and not these functions, sorry, the props that this function is receiving, these to-dos on ToDoClick, it's receiving it from here, right? So constant visible to-do list is this file right here is connecting to this presentational UI component here, right? It's connecting to it like so. And we're passing in two parameters. We're passing in the map state by props, which is returning the to-dos, which have the specific visibility filter that we want it to have, right? It's returning those specific to-dos as the props here. And it's also returning the map dispatch to props. So it's returning this action creator essentially. So it's taking the like when you click on a to-do, you are passing that ID to as a parameter in the toggle to-do function, which is then being accessed here, right? So it's basically turning it from being a complete to-do, right? It's crossed out, to being a non-complete, to being an active, to do, right? Now, so that's what I want you to that's what I want you to think about, is that these two components, right? They're very, very related. The to-do list is the presentational side. This is the UI. This is the JSX. We're mapping through all of our to-dos here, and we are rendering them. Okay, but what we're actually importing into Sandbox is we're importing the visible to-do list itself, which contains the business logic and which is connected to the to-do list. So essentially what happens is both of these components are combined into one. They're connected. This is the part that's rendered in terms of the UI, but these are the props that are being passed into the UI. So I hopefully I can make that, I've made that clear as much as I can, but essentially in order to provide the correct props in to-do list, right? We want to provide to-do list our to-dos, right? But we have different visibility filters. We can show all to-dos, we can show active to-dos, we can show completed to-dos, right? In order for our to-do list to render the right collection of to-dos, we have combined the to-do list UI component with the visible to-do list container component. We have connected them here so that we have exported a component called visible to-do list, which is shown here. And this visible to-do list has these returned values, as the parameters for the props that this UI component receives. So, and then let's take a look at the footer component real quick. So the footer here shows the filter link components, and the filter is basically this is the type of each of these links. So when one of these filters are clicked, it dispatches an action with the type of show all. And then what that does is that it then triggers a dispatch to set a new visibility filter, which will then trigger a re-render of the to-dos based on the updated filter, right? Because if the set visibility filter, if this dispatched action goes through, what happens is our central data store now has a new filter. And when that central data store is updated, that triggers a re-render of all the components that use that specific piece of state. So since this filter was changed, that means that this business logic is reactivated. And based off of this new filter, it returns a new set of to-dos, which then updates what to-dos are mapped to props, which in turn updates the props that the to-do list component receives, which in turn ultimately updates the value of the connected component visible to-do list. So a little bit of a difficult explanation, but the key here is ultimately pretty simple, guys, to review here. So we have a central store, right? Like we've created a store, and that store uses the create store function from Redux to create a store using the set of reducers that we have put together into an exported object called ToDoApp. So we've created a store with these reducers that are able to be used to update the values of that store. So now, what we've done is, since we've wrapped our app in the provider and we've wrapped it in the store, we are able to pass the dispatch function down into our components. So, for example, in the AdToDo components, this presentational component, it's receiving the dispatch function from the central store, and it allows us to dispatch actions from this component as long as we connect the AdToDo components to the central store, right? And so once this is connected, and once this action is dispatched with this value, it dispatches the AdToDo action, right? And the AdToDo action is pretty simple. So we're using an action creator here, and we're returning an action with a type AdToDo and with a parameter called text, right? And what happens is now that triggers this function, which causes us to return a new state object with the existing state along with the new to-do item that was just created. Right? Now, let's say we wanted to toggle and mark as complete that new to-do item that I just made. So I just click on it, right? And it marks it as complete. So what happens is each of these to-do items, right? It's a mapped array of objects, and each of them has an onClick function. And that onClick function is actually coming from the props in the visible to-do list, right? The map dispatch to props. And what it's doing here is it's dispatching, it's dispatching an action to work the to toggle the to-do, essentially, right? So once that item is clicked on, it dispatches the toggle to do action with the ID as its dispatches the toggle to do action creator, sorry, which has the ID as its parameter. And so we go back here and we see that it marks, if the index that was passed along as a parameter, if the index of this array matches the index of one of the to-do objects inside of state, then what it does is it marks completed, it marks this to-do item as the opposite, as the not value of whatever it was before. So if it was false, it becomes true. If it's true, it becomes false. And then it returns the new value of that specific to-do item, right? So that's essentially the main Redux tutorial right there that we just walked through. What we're going to do next is we're going to integrate Redux reducers to store the information for our events API that we put together. So remember, we just created a new serverless DynamoDB CRUD API using AWS Amplify to store our events. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the events that the API pulls, and we're going to store them in the central data store, and we are going to map that state to the props of a presentational component that we want to display those events. So that's going to be coming up next, and hopefully that'll really help you take in the practical workflow that comes with working with Redux.